Rapunzel, lay down your hair. Rapunzel actually is an age-old tale, and most people think that Rapunzel's first appearance was in the 19th century with the Grimm brothers, but it actually dates back way longer than that. The first recorded version of Rapunzel was actually Christian I iconographies. Sorry if I butcher his name, but with his story of Saint Barbara. She was a young girl that got locked away in the 3rd century, and this story takes on a lot of the generic motifs of Rapunzel, with the long hair and her being locked away and being a damsel in distress, but it doesn't follow the classic storytelling line, which is why a lot of people don't really consider it an early Rapunzel tale. Rapunzel's flowing hair, though, and used as a ladder for the Prince Charming, doesn't actually date back until 934 AD. The one part of Rapunzel that is always stuck through, no matter what version you look at, is actually her luscious locks or her golden flowing hair. Um, Rapunzel is known for her long blonde hair, and I'm sure if I said what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say Rapunzel, most of you would actually say her hair. And that stands true with most versions. A lot of the motifs that actually stand out to me in Rapunzel is she's actually a mythological story. And along with Beauty and the Beast and other stories like that, they don't really have many fairy tales that are actually mythological, with meaning that there's magical or non-realistic features, such as Rapunzel's growing hair and or her magical tears. Another motif that's used a lot in Rapunzel is damsel in distress. She's in most versions locked away in a tower, and she's trying to get out, but she cannot. So that has to do in more modern versions tend to use it as a feminist kind of way to portray the story, but in the earlier versions, it's more so just her being needing help. I have a very unique visual of Rapunzel's motifs, but we'll come back to that at the end. So this is just a overview of all the archetypes or motifs in Rapunzel that I've noticed. Um, so first off, like I mentioned, is damsel in distress. I've kind of went over this one before, but Rapunzel is being locked away in a tower, which is often times of showing help, which the tower actually did have no doors and only one window that she was able to look out and see the stars occasionally. This is just a picture of an older version of Rapunzel. So basically, her stepmother, the enchantress who stole her away, she was very rude and demanded her to stay in the tower and that her hair will be. It was more so to be secluded so that nothing can harm her because the enchantress tended to use Rapunzel's power to get young. So that's just also a older picture of Rapunzel and the enchantress trying to steal her powers of youth. Another motif is the hero. So in this version, it was the prince, and Rapunzel. He actually comes to help her escape the tower, and Rapunzel uses him to get free of the tower that she's stuck in. That's just a picture of Flynn and Rapunzel. So a devil figure. The devil is actually religion, and devils are actually in most fairy tales that you look at, especially in older ones. The enchantress is technically the devil figure or the figure of hatred or any of the attributes like that. So she traded Rapunzel at birth for plants, and it just shows like she has malicious intent. And older versions like this, you could see it's like it gives creepier vibes of the art. So star-crossed lovers, along with the lines of Flynn and Rapunzel, or just the prince and Rapunzel, they tend to not be ideal lovers. And in fact, a fun fact is Flynn Rider and Rapunzel in Tangled's version is actually the largest age gap in all of the princes and princesses. But in the Grimm brothers story, it ends with the prince losing his sight and Rapunzel locks get cut off, and the enchantress' disapproval is through the roof. In the journey of the Disney's adaptation, they go on a journey and see the lanterns, and Flynn can actually flee the town, and it helps Rapunzel escape. so they tend to follow some sort of flowing journey. And then one more is the darkness. Rapunzel's father steals the rampions, which is the plants, which was why she got traded, and in the dark, which represents the evils coming the next day, and the Enchantress just finds out and demands a trade. So some of the unique facts of the Grimm brothers is the Grimm brothers version, the mother was actually pregnant and getting cravings so strong that it prompted her to actually commit crimes. And this is unique to the Grimm brothers version because they normally take a more darker approach to these type of stories. So criminal aspects are not normally in most kid fairy tales. Number two is Rapunzel is given to the witch because her parents stole plants. This kind of has to do with the cravings of crime, but in other versions, the witch steals Rapunzel, and or the witch ends up getting Rapunzel in the deal. Another one is Rapunzel is actually forced to give birth in a desert. They don't necessarily really explain too much deeply into this one, but she's kind of in the desert at the time, and they're not willing to actually like get her out of the desert, so she's actually forced to give birth. Four is the prince actually tries to commit suicide at the end of it, but he actually fails, and instead he actually goes blind, which is not what he wanted, but it actually becomes happily ever after because Rapunzel has magical tears that help, and that happens to be fact number five. The more recent version that I'm sure most of you are aware of is Tangled. Rapunzel was actually the first princess with supernatural powers that Disney's ever done. So that's actually really unique because most of the time they try and keep it realistic, but with Tangled, she actually does have magical powers. Rapunzel actually gets her sidekick, which is the little chameleon that I'm sure you are all aware of. He's for comedic relief, which is why Disney included him, and he's not actually a super important part of the story, but it's just a unique part that only the Tangled version has. Rapunzel's version in Tangled is actually a musical, which gives it a more lighthearted approach as opposed to the Grimm brothers. When you see Rapunzel with her hair cut off for the first time, it actually gets turned into like a dark brown color, and it gets kind of like a modern bob cut look. And Flynn actually kind of enjoys the look, but Rapunzel's just not used to it, so it's just weird to see it for the first time in like pictures and or animated. And Flynn, Ryder, or Eugene is actually not a prince in Tangled. He's actually just a portraying of Prince Charming, and he's actually a criminal or a bandit. So most of the time in Rapunzel, it's a prince that climbs up her tower, but in Tangled, it's not. So both of these videos are just short stories, and they're like animated shorts of the more modern storytelling and the older Grimm version storytelling.